So, in an effort and an attempt to be a better person, I am going to read a children's book tonight for the kids. And tonight it's The Red Horse. And I just acquired this one recently in an estate. This one's happens to be To Pete from Mother, June 8, 1939. The Red Horse by Elsa Moeschlin. Moeschlin? I don't know. Cotton Can Publishers, New York. I love how this book is illustrated. Printed in Germany. Once upon a time, there was a little horse carved out of pine wood and painted red. Peter's mother gave it to him at Christmas time. Peter called it the horse Trot Trot, for he wanted oh so much to ride it. But the red horse was so small that one could only put a doll on his flat back, and he was stiff and wooden too. No wonder, when one is made of wood. Peter was stubborn, and so he wouldn't let go of his wish, and every day he whispered in the little horse's ear, "Wouldn't you like to grow?" And once a very soft voice, as if it came from the radio when the weather is bad, actually answered. And this voice, which couldn't be any other than Trot Trot's voice, said clearly, "Yes." "But then you'll have to eat a lot," said Peter happily. Peter laid a piece of bread in the cigar box, which was the horse's stable, and behold, the next morning the bread wasn't there anymore. From that time on, Peter brought the red horse as much bread as he wanted. He even brought him the cereal that he didn't want to finish himself. And Trot Trot had a good appetite and ate the bread, and also the cereal. Peter's mother praised him for not letting his cereal stand untouched any longer. The horse grew. You could notice it by the fact that the cigar box stable became much too small for him. Peter had to carry Trot Trot up to the attic so that his mother would not discover what was happening, for he wanted so much to keep his secret to himself. Now the horse was already as big as a cat. He could turn his head and move his tail. That he could move his tail wasn't really so strange, for it was made out of real horse hairs. "Is it fun to grow?" asked Peter. "Yes," neighed the horse. Now he was as big as a dog. Peter hardly knew what to do. Trot Trot needed so much fodder, and soon there wasn't room enough under the attic roof for such a growing horse. Spring came with white and blue flowers. They nodded to Peter and said, "Do bring your red horse down to us. Here he can eat the young green grass until he is satisfied. And what could be better than the summer house for a stable? Your mother won't need it until June has come." How clever the flowers are, thought Peter. And he looked into the summer house and agreed that a better stable couldn't be found anywhere. And he ran up to the attic to carry his horse down. But Trot Trot was much too heavy, for now he was almost as big as a goat. "How can one get so strong?" Peter asked his mother. "Eat a lot of cereal," she answered. The next morning he ate so much cereal that his mother threw up her hands. He ate and he ate and he ate. After 2 weeks, he could lift the little red horse. He had so much strength. Well, this is where someone got creative with the crayons. Early one morning, when the birds first began to tweet and twitter high above his head, and when everyone was still asleep, he ran upstairs barefooted, lifted the horse onto his back, and carried it quietly and carefully down the stairs, across the garden path, and into the new stable. "Now, Trot Trot, you have to stand quite still, and don't you dare to neigh." "Shh, shh," said Peter. You can imagine his fright when at noontime he found the stable empty. "Who has stolen my horse? Who has stolen my little red horse?" he began to cry, just as the tears were rolling down his head. He heard a light stamping. He looked all around the summer house. He ran out into the garden, and actually there was his horse walking about in the sunshine, enjoying the grass and weeds, for now Trot Trot could move not only his head and tail, but also his legs. Quickly Peter led the runaway back into the stable. Luckily no one had seen them. "You can only go out to graze at night, Trot Trot," said Peter. "Otherwise I'll carry you back up into the attic again." "Yes," neighed Trot Trot. The red horse was obedient. He only went out to graze at night. He only neighed when Peter allowed it, and grew and flourished, so that it was a joy to see. The green fodder agreed with him splendidly. He grew fatter and fatter and ate no more cereal. One evening Peter had a second fright, for he heard his mother saying, "It's getting warmer and warmer. Soon summer will be here. The summer house will have to be put in order." Peter threw himself about on his bed and couldn't sleep. Where could he find a suitable stable now? Again he wanted to cry, but when he looked out of the window and discovered that the night wasn't dark at all, for it was May, when the days let their light shine far into the nights, a great and daring thought came to him. Quickly he jumped out of bed, put on his clothes, took his shoes in his hands, quietly opened his bedroom door, and crept down the stairs softly as a burglar. At the front door he thought once more of his mother, but the next moment he was thinking only of the little red horse, and he scampered like a weasel through the green garden. Trot Trot was grazing as usual behind the stable. "Quick, quick," he whispered, "Peter," and he put on his shoes. "We have to go." "Yes," neighed Trot Trot. "At last you are my riding horse, and at last I am your rider," rejoiced Peter. He was in the saddle and felt for the reins. The painted reins loosened themselves and laid themselves willingly in his hands. Slowly the boy and the horse trotted past sleeping houses, but as soon as they came to an open field, they went on at a gallop. Peter, flying forwards so quickly, felt as if the trees were running backwards. When it had become quite light, Trot Trot sprang behind some bushes and remained there hidden until evening. What a long day it was for our Peter! If only he had taken along a sandwich to eat. But he had thought only of his red horse, and in his hurry he had quite forgotten that one cannot live by riding alone. Trot Trot was better off. Between the stones and under the trees there was fodder enough. Peter wished he were a horse himself now. He picked some white flowers and smelled them. They were fragrant. He could forget being hungry as long as he held them under his nose. In the evening, the horse neighed, "Up, up, up." On they went at a terrific speed. Peter had to throw his arms around the red neck with the green heart to keep from falling off. "Where are you jumping to, Trot Trot?" asked Peter, when his horse paused before a brook. "Ho, ho, home," wailed Trot Trot. "And where is that?" asked Peter. But the horse only kept on neighing. "Ho, ho, home. Ho, ho, home." The next morning they passed a little cottage. An old woman who was just baking called out of her window, wait a minute," and then she came out with a large roll which was still quite warm and gave it to Peter. "That is the custom here," she said, as if she needed to excuse herself. Peter had no objections to this custom, for he was very hungry. The woman looked at the horse and said, "Perhaps you come from a circus?" Peter nodded, for he could not speak with his mouth so full of bread. Later, Peter and Trot Trot rested in a gay birch wood with a friendly brook in it, and stayed there until 5:30, and the dusk had come, and Peter observed that the world is very beautiful when one is not hungry. On they went like that, night after night, and at last also day by day. And there they are, going day by day. We're so far away from home now that they were no longer had to be afraid that the police might be following them. Everywhere people stood still, of course, when they saw the strange pair, and stared and were amazed, and said, "What a curious horse that is." Peter told everybody, "Yes, it is a curious horse, and comes from a circus." But many people did not know at all what a circus is, and his answer did not help them much. So when one of them cried, "That is surely a machine horse with a motor in his body," Peter from that day on decided to say that he was riding on a machine horse and that Trot Trot had a motor in his body. And now the people nodded with understanding, for even in the deep woods they had heard talk about motors. In payment for being allowed to look at a machine horse, Peter asked for a little something to eat. Luckily, there were no newspapers in that country. The country folk only heard about what was happening in the world on big market days twice a year. Otherwise, Peter's mother might have found out where her boy went when he run away. One morning, Trot Trot was trotting along a wide blue river towards blue mountains. The weather was lovely. The sun was shining, the birches were fragrant, and yet Peter would not have minded if the journey were to come to an end at once. He was a little tired, for when you have to ride every day, riding is not much fun anymore, and really it was not so very pleasant, sleeping always on the ground. But whenever he asked, "How much longer are we going to ride?" Trot Trot answered each time, "Ho, ho, home." The answer did not make Peter any wiser, so by and by he gave up asking. But whenever they came to a new mountain, he thought to himself, "I wonder if Trot Trot's home does not lie behind that peak." Of course, the little red horse knew where his home was, for horses always know that any river will tell you. He knew where a certain hill was, with birches and pine trees all around it. And on the hill he knew there was a little brown house of wood. But Peter could not know about the hill and the wood and the little brown house just by looking at Trot Trot, and so for Peter the journey led into nowhere and very far away, until one morning they met three strange girls upon a street. These girls were really almost as strange to him as the little red horse itself. They had on red bonnets and red jackets and aprons that were as bright as their jackets. When Peter looked at these girls and compared their bonnets and jackets and aprons and the flowers upon them with his own riding horse, he said to himself quietly that surely, pretty soon, he would be reaching Trot Trot's home. The horse pranced about gaily, as if he wanted to be telling Peter that he was right. Then Peter became merry again too, and laughed at the girls who were petting the horse and waved to them with his hand. Long after he and Trot Trot had galloped away, suddenly Trot Trot neighed so loudly that Peter almost fell from the saddle. When the little red horse ran towards a little brown house up a little hill, I want to be careful because this book is very old. Pushed open the door and clattered into a room so low that Peter struck his head against the frame of the door. There was no one in the room, but a fire was leaping in the fireplace. Peter dismounted and stirred the fire, for boys always love fire. Trot Trot turned his head this way and that way, and warmed his back as if it were winter, and now a tall old man stepped into the room, dressed in clothes as joyful as a rainbow, and laughed and said, "Ah, there you are, my little red horse. But oh, how you have grown! I recognize you by the green heart on your neck. When I was carving you so long ago, I never dreamed that you could grow so big. I fed Trot Trot, and that is why he has grown so big," said Peter proudly. The red horse neighed. "Yes, yes. Well, well, well," said the old man. He did indeed fall into good hands at your house. And after a while he added thoughtfully, at the same time nodding his head, "Every tree has a heart. I have known that for a long time, but I never quite knew where it was. Do you understand? But if one accidentally finds this heart in a piece of wood, then the wood comes alive, whether it happens to be a wooden shoe or a fiddle or a little wooden horse." Then Peter suddenly understood why feeding Trot Trot had helped. After they had told all their adventures, one after the other, to the old man, Peter was glad to get into bed, though it was not very soft. And he slept, and slept, and slept, round the clock and round the clock. When he woke up the second morning, refreshed and happy, he was delighted with his trot-trot, and with the many little wooden horses, and the pots of paint, and the sharp wood carver's tools, which were such fun to play with, and the sharp and dangerous. But presently he began to feel a little bored. And when one day it began to storm, and it rained and lightened and thundered for a whole week, he began to cry and sobbed, "Mother, dear mother, mother, where are you?" And the old man saw that Peter loved his mother more than he did the little red horse after all, and said, "Don't cry, Peter. Now we can travel to your house. The train isn't far away. We'll ride fast in a coach, and we'll tie Trot-Trot up in the baggage car." But Trot-Trot was not content with this. "No," he neighed, and he planted his legs so firmly on the floor that he couldn't be budged from the spot. "Then here you stay, you stubborn fellow," said the old man, and he took Peter's hand, went out with him, and locked the door. And it was high time, too, for already you could hear the locomotive whistle. There it is. They would have come too late, but the train waited for them, and then off they went, past many stations, and in the evening they stood before a familiar front door, and inside you could hear a familiar step, and Peter's mother stepped towards them, took Peter into her arms, and cried for happiness. Then they all began to tell each other everything, and Peter's mother said that the police really did not know how to look for little children, and the wood carver nodded in assent, and stayed there for 8 days longer, because it took that much time to tell everything exactly. And after that he went back again to the little brown house and to his many wooden horses. And from the little brown house he wrote this letter, which isn't as gay as the rest of this story, for life isn't always gay. Think of it. We forgot to leave the fodder there for your Trot-Trot when we went away, and when I came back to the workroom, there he stood on the table, and was only an ordinary little wooden horse again, like all the others. Love from your old friend, the carver of wooden horses. And that's the end of The Red Horse by Elsa Moeschlin. And there's the little red horse. Good night, kids.